All right, so I'm going to call this meeting of the school committee of October 19th to order. And before I do, I'm actually going to remember to read the blurb, which is present to the Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law GLC 30A S18 and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtatoni's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. This meeting of the Somerville School Committee will be conducted via remote participation. We will post an audio recording, audio, video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website and the local access government channels, SCAT. And with that, we will have a moment of silence and a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the Republic
in which it stands,
under indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Superintendent, will you please call a roll?
Certainly. Dr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Krepshin?
Present.
President McLaughlin?
This is Emily. I know he's trying to sign in.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Curtatoni? Mr. Green?
Here.
Ms. Barish?
Here.
Ms. Patone?
Here.
Dr. Ackman?
Present.
And Ms. Norman?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And we also have a treat. So the next item of business is our report of the student representatives and what we have been doing, or the student council at the high school has been doing. They're the ones who decide, and with the conjunction with Mr. Lagambina, Principal Lagambina, the student reps. And so we've tried multiple variations over the years, and this one seems to be working well, where we have a sophomore and a junior, so that each member has a 2-year span, and there's sort of a newcomer and a mentor. And it also helps to give more of a perspective to have students in 2 different grades. In the past, we've had seniors, and through no fault of their own, their focus tends to wane in the spring of their senior year. So we're going to continue with this model. So with that, I very much want to welcome Brian Racinos and Natalia, a returning champion as a junior, is here tonight. And so welcome both of you, and we look forward to hearing the student report.
Hi everyone, this is Natalia. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so good evening everyone. It's great to be back here with you all. So the first topic I would like to discuss this evening is the event that occurred this past Sunday. The Sunrise Summerville group organized a march from City Hall to Davis Square. On their way to Davis Square, they sang songs and chants, and it was just like a very nice turnout. When they arrived at Davis, there were some public speakers who spoke their minds on climate change and their opinions on the new Green Deal. And from what I've heard, it was a great turnout. I was unfortunately unable to go because of the time, but it was great. And then the next topic is progress reports. They come out on Wednesday, and from some of my peers, I've heard that they're turning in and making up assignments to make sure that their progress reports are in tip-top shape. I forgot to mention, maybe to clarify, what the Sunrise Summerville group was. I mentioned this group a couple weeks ago. It's a group organized by a couple of Summerville High School students who are spreading awareness about climate change and the laws that are being discuss to combat climate change. And then we have our report from our new member, Brian. So,
Welcome, Brian.
Hi everyone, my name is Brian. I'm a 10th grader at Summerville High School, and I guess I'm the new representative going into the school committee, I guess. So for my report, I'm going to be starting off to how classes are going right now for students. So classes are going well. I feel like they are adapting pretty well to like the new remote setting that we have right now. It is quite unique and different, but I feel like students are adapting pretty well and getting used to it. Along with like school and the classes, I wanted to talk also about schedules, which is another topic I have. I feel that the schedules have been very efficient this year, especially with like the different learning format that we are having, all remote. The A week and B week schedule is definitely more better compared to having a schedule with 6 classes a day. Having 3 to 4 classes has definitely been like easier for students and helping them not be as overwhelmed as it was to have 6 classes, especially to some students who like to take harder and more advanced classes a day. And I also wanted to talk about one more thing is mentoring at Somerville High School. That's a new thing that there is. So I feel that mentoring has been going pretty well. It's usually a teacher that you have, and they're set as like the person who's like in charge of you and like keeps in contact with you and is really somewhere to someone who's there to help you and giving you like support and whatever you need. And I feel like that has been a very good thing that they added this year for students, an extra resource or an extra way to receive help from the school in general. So yeah, that's all I have today.
That's great. Superintendent Skipper?
Sure. Chair Norman, I think it would be great if Brian just could introduce himself to school committee, as you did to me earlier today. Just tell them a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So like I said, my name is Brian Racinos. I am a 10th grader at Somerville High School. I am a former student from the East Somerville Community School. I attended from kindergarten to 8th grade. Currently, I'm part of the debate team. This is my 3rd year in the debate team. I started when I was in 8th grade at East. So this is my 2nd year at the high school debate level, I guess. After school, I normally do karate 2 times a week. I have been doing that for 8 years now. Started when I was 7 years old, and now that I'm 15, and I'm still doing that. Some things that personal about myself: I am the oldest of 3 children, and both my parents are from El Salvador, making me Salvadoran. And yeah, I guess that's some things about me.
It's great.
It sounds like, Brian, when you get your interest, you stick with it. You've got things, I mean, to stick for that many years. Karate, I like that is I love that, and you're trying different things, but you're also sticking to it. That is great. And I think any physical exercise you can do now. Can I ask, is your karate remote or are you doing that in person?
So yeah, it has been remote since the pandemic started, but actually they are offering in-person classes with social distancing and masks and everything. So actually starting tomorrow, it's going to be like my, sorry for the background noise. Starting tomorrow, I'm gonna start going back because I'm trying to actually graduate and get like my full black belt. So I'm almost done with like karate. I'm very close. So I'm gonna start going back tomorrow and try to complete what I still have to do.
I have full confidence that you will complete it, and please let us know, because getting your black belt is one of those markers that needs to be celebrated. That shows years of both physical and mental discipline. So thank you so much. Can I have a quick question about the mentors? How is that different from other relationships you have? And you said that it's going well. How often do you speak with your mentors? Your mentor.
Well, normally it's so the mentor, it's normally on our asynchronous day, the day we don't have school or actually no live classes. So that's when at least my mentor tries to schedule a time for us to go on Zoom for at least 5 minutes and like talk. In this instance, he's a him. So I talk to him and he asks us question of how we're doing and stuff like that. So it's, I think, one time a week, depending on when they can, but they do try to stay in contact with the students and see how they're doing. So about one time a week, I guess.
That's great. And I like that you've acknowledged how different this year and the things that are working, but also you should feel free to bring forward things that may not be working so well or might need some tweaking. And Kat, are you still with us?
Natalia.
Oh, I'm sorry, Natalia. Oh, I do this to my kids all the time. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'm still here.
So I just wanted to ask a little more about this student organization, because I have always been impressed with the level of activity and the strategy and the thought that goes into it that the students are doing. Do you know if this group is going to have any other future activities, or if a student wanted to join, how could they, is there someone that they could contact to join this group?
Yes.
The Summerville.
So they have meetings, I believe, every Wednesday around 6 p.m. From what I've known, I've been invited to a couple. I've gone to at least 3 meetings. And we also have an Instagram account, which is run by the members, who I can give in a second. So the Instagram account is Sunrise Summerville without any spaces. So just Sunrise Summerville. And I know a few of the organizers are Rio, Emily, I forget her last name, and then a couple more students who I can report back next or in 2 weeks if you'd like. From what I've heard, I think they are planning to have more events, but they're to be decided. So
Fantastic. So I appreciate both of you sharing both what's happening in school, but also what happens outside of school, because that is also a very important part of student life. And so unless anyone has any questions, and I know that the president of City Council, Matt McLaughlin, has joined us. If any of my colleagues have any questions for our student reps, and if not, I don't see any. So thank you so much, both of you. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in 2 weeks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Brian. Bye, Natalia.
Thank you so much. So Mr. McLaughlin has joined us. When the mayor joins us, he would like to give an update on where we are in the reopening. And so I think we're going to move the approval of minutes to the next school committee meeting. And I think we'll go to public comment, and then when the mayor joins us, we will hear any updates from him. So in terms of public comment, I must read my speech. At the start of each regularly scheduled school committee meeting, individuals or group representatives will be invited to address the school committee, and the length of the public comment will ordinarily be 20 minutes in length unless otherwise determined by the chair or majority of the school committee. The school committee reserves the right to rearrange its agenda to accommodate scheduled presenters. Speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to present their material. The presiding chair may permit extension of this time. Additionally, the chair may limit comments to 2 minutes based on the number of individuals signed up to speak. A group of residents appearing at a meeting to express favor or opposition to a particular agenda item are encouraged to designate one member of the group as a spokesperson to be heard on the topic, and other members of the group may be heard if they feel they can contribute additional information. Improper conduct and remarks will not be allowed. defamatory, or abusive remarks are always out of order. If a person continues to disrupt the meeting after a clear warning, the chair has the authority to order the person to leave. All remarks will be addressed through the chair to the meeting. School committee will not hear personnel complaints of school personnel, nor against any member of the school community in public session. Individuals may address topics on the agenda or items within the school committee's scope of responsibility. Under most circumstances, administrative channels are the proper means for a disposition of legitimate complaints involving staff members. Written comments may be presented to the school committee before or after the meeting for the school committee members' review and consideration. And we always encourage the public to send us their comments in writing as well, just to make sure we get them right. So with that, we have 5 speakers. I would also like to acknowledge that Counselor Will Imba, Counselor at Large, has also joined us. Welcome. We always love to see our city counterparts and enjoy working with you. So each speaker will get 3 minutes. I'm going to go down the list and then remind you as you go. So when it's your turn, when you have the floor, please unmute yourself and we will start the timer. So it's Frito Duran, Annie March, Lauren Hanley, Beatrice Gomez, and Kensinia Samla Kabola. So when it's your turn, can you say your name and your address so we have that on record? And Frito, the floor is now yours.
Hi, I'm Frito Duran. I live 17 Kingston Street, and I'm the father of a first grader. I have 2 points. 1, the city needs to prioritize school opening, and 2, the district must communicate so that families can organize their lives. I am so frustrated and stressed about Summerville's approach. I agree that the safety of teachers, students, and families is critical, but the education of our children should also be paramount. School closures impose incredible hardship upon children and families. Our children have been out of school for 7 months. 7 months. And there appears to be no end in sight. Meanwhile, the city has opened indoor dining and Legoland. Where are Somerville's priorities? We hear that the city is pushing an HVAC overhaul that may add months of delay, and most public health experts suggest it's unnecessary. I hear that negotiations for hybrid haven't even started. This is insane. I thought we were going to go hybrid in September. All the science we have suggests that sending young children back to school with basic precautions such as masks and HEPA filters incur little to no increase in transmission over baseline community spread. For example, there was another article in the New York Times this morning showing little transmission due to schools in New York. Keeping students away from school causes lifelong damage. Public health experts are urging us to reopen schools for young children. People like Joseph Allen, who heads Harvard's Health Building Program, or Hashish Shah, who is the dean of the Brown University School of Public Health. Don't we believe in public education? The current situation is awful. Zoom school is just not a good way to learn for young kids, and it's terrible for parents who need to work. And second, I'm really angry about the lack of communication from the district. We have been told absolutely nothing about any timeline. We found out super late that we would go back to online only. We had to scramble to figure out childcare. Now I hear there's some December 1st date, but if you can't attend town halls, which by the way are the time where our family puts kids to bed, you get no communication about it from the district. This is not inconsequential, nice to know information. This is crucial information. We need to juggle childcare and our jobs. Again, 2 points. We need to prioritize education and school reopening, and we need communication from the district. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next up is Annie Marsh. Annie, the floor is yours.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Annie March, 29 Berkeley Street. I'm always on here talking. Thank you so much for taking public comment. I feel very heard. It's really, really important to hear from us. Thank you. I want to talk about HVAC. I think there are two sets of guidelines regarding HVAC in schools. One is the DESI guidelines, which I believe most other Massachusetts districts are currently open and operating under. And the other is the Mayor's Office guidelines, which are more rigorous and invasive than the DESI guidelines. I would like the school committee to request the Mayor's Office publish a text document outlining their HVAC guidelines and make that available to the public. The Mayor's Office has projected their plan to cost between $5 and $7 million and to keep school buildings closed at least until December. I would like the school committee to request the Mayor's Office also submit an objective timeline and budget for enacting the DESI guidelines so that the school committee can compare the two plans. It seems like the Mayor's Office has unilaterally decided to pursue their HVAC plan. I would like to roll that decision back so that school committee, parents, teachers, and staff can be included in that decision because it does affect how long schools will be closed. I appreciate that the mayor and his team are trying to make our schools safer and more robust during COVID-19, but there are scientist parents in our districts who are knowledgeable about this disease, and some of those parents do not believe that the mayor's plan is actually safer than the DESI plan. To date, I do not think any COVID transmissions have taken place in schools operating under the DESI HVAC plan. I personally would support the mayor's HVAC plan if it makes students and teachers safer, but I'm not seeing evidence to support that. The mayor's team has presented evidence that COVID is airborne and germs can be left on surfaces, but it doesn't seem like those germs are infecting people in the public schools with the DESI HVAC plan. If we are to follow the mayor's office plan, I would like some evidence that their plan is better than the DESI plan. There's a real cost to keeping our schools closed. Sorry for my slack, y'all. Parents are stressed out. It's a very stressful year. I'm kind of laughing at how stressful it is. But some families are being pushed to the brink. Suicide and panic attacks are extreme symptoms of mental illness and stress. And we need to consider what we're asking from our families and how these HVAC decisions, which seem unrelated, may actually be forcing more isolation and confinement. And I realize considering the DESI plan at this point and including more people in the decision making could actually keep schools closed longer because it just takes longer to make the process happen. So I'm relying on you, my beautiful school committee members, to make it smart, to be smart about it and open our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren Hanley. You were up and you now have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Yep.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lauren Hanley. I live at 80 Bay State Avenue and I have 2 children in the Somerville Public Schools. I'm a physician at the Massachusetts General Hospital and I'm speaking tonight to express how disappointed I am in the process and planning for Somerville's return to in-person schooling. I understand why people may be afraid. I've personally been there myself. However, we cannot let fear drive these important decisions, such as the return of children to school, particularly when we now have the science to guide us. Policy should not be driven by emotions. Policy should not be driven by anecdote, and policy should not be driven by fear. Decisions to reopen schools should always be framed with the risks of not reopening schools and how they will affect our children and our society in the short and long term. From my understanding of the plans, there is a $7 million building renovation in the future. No one has provided any data about why this strategy is more effective than the DESI strategy or the Harvard School of Public Health Healthy Building Strategy. No one has explained how this particular long and expensive plan will decrease our staff and students' risk of COVID. A review of Emily Oster's data and her COVID tracker of schools shows that 200,000 students from across 47 states in the last 2 weeks of September yielded an overall coronavirus infection rate of just 0.14% among students and 0.24% among staff. When you hone in on the Massachusetts data, the student rate is just 0.06. and the staff rate is 0.05 for these in-person scenarios. Again, driving home the concept that being in school does not drive transmission. Furthermore, from this data, staff in the remote-only setting had an increased positivity rate of COVID compared to full in-person and hybrid plans. Again, community transmission drives this virus, and being at home was not protective to the staff in this data set. What would the teachers want to do with $5 to $7 million that are being budgeted for these building mitigations? Has anybody asked them? Here's an analogy I would like for you to all to consider. If people were receiving a treatment for cancer that had multiple side effects, some of them life-threatening, and the data from multiple studies did not show any evidence of benefit of this treatment, would doctors in good conscience be able to keep giving this treatment? Of course they would not. So here we are with a proposed intervention against COVID, which is closing our schools, that has so far in every population level study been shown not to be effective at mitigating COVID. And yet we know that the effects of elementary and high school closures on children are absolutely devastating. So how in good conscience can we go on like this? I request that our elected leaders collectively use the checks and balances of local government, including, please, the members of the school committee, the city council, ask questions, probe, and advocate for what you think may be right to help protect our children and get them back into the classrooms. Today is October 19th, and I consider this a pediatric public health emergency. These kids' lives depend on it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I'm going to acknowledge that Mayor Curtatone has joined us. Given that we have 2 more public speakers, I'm going to finish with public speaking and then ask the mayor to give an update. So next up is Beatrice Gomez. Beatrice, you have the floor.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Beatrice Gomez. I live at 17 Pritchard Ave. I have a child at the Argenciano in 8th grade and another one in 5th grade at the Brown School. I'm speaking today as an experienced project manager in construction and real estate and planning. I happen to work and have been working in a major academic hospitals for the past 12 years. First, I'm going to ask the city for transparency. It is not clear what are the proposed upgrades for each ventilation system. We don't know what we're adding, and we're adding filtration systems, changing entire air handlers. Second, do we have a schedule on what are the steps for performing these upgrades? What is the design process? What is the pricing bidding process? What is the procurement? What is the duration of construction? And finally, how are we training our facilities and maintenance staff to oversee the systems? A $5 to $7 million investment without a maintenance plan is a recipe for failure. It is very difficult, I can say from experience, that retrofitting building systems will perform as intended, and they require serious maintenance and very experienced people. At hospitals, we have tradespeople who teach in the trade schools. Does Summerville have that kind of staff and capacity? Do they have a building management system that tells them when that system will fail? What's the point of investing $5 or $7 million if we don't have a guarantee that the system will perform as intended? Then I'm going to ask the question and use what I use as a project manager, common sense. So recently at Brigham and Women's, we had an outbreak of COVID. In hospitals, we have the top-notch ventilation systems, and yet there was an outbreak where 12 patients were affected and about 50 staff, and these are rough numbers, please do not quote me. In this outbreak, within perfect ventilation systems happened, and what was the key to that? The key to that was human behavior and not a slight oversight on wearing PPE and reporting on a person might have come sick to work when they shouldn't have. So how effective is a ventilation system if we cannot control behavior? And in fact, doctors, nurses, when they go into what's called an airborne isolation room, they come out covered completely in PPE. That should tell you something about the effectiveness of the system and what is truly your first line of defense. So I'm going to quote Ashley, even the most robust HVAC system cannot control all airflows and completely prevent dissemination of an infectious aerosol disease transmission by droplets or aerosols. We need to keep this in mind. Second of all, what is plan B? What if we cannot get the system up and running in a year? I am right now working on redoing the ventilation system for an entry corridor. These are simple systems, VAV systems, that have 12-week lead times. This does not meet the December 1st deadline. And I have a much, much more advanced schedule. So it's not clear how the system, without a schedule, I don't know how. Okay, that's it. All right. That's it.
Thank you. And so our final speaker tonight, and please correct me on the pronunciation, is Ksenia Samakov. I can't say it. I'm terrible with names and I apologize, but you do have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. How do you say your
Okay.
name?
Yes, I will say my name. No worries. Hello, everyone. My name is Ksenia Samakhvalova. I live at 60 Irving Street in Somerville. I have a second grader at the Brown School and a preschooler who is currently at home with a nanny. I will preface my comments saying that I have a lot of privilege, which allows us to have a nanny, so both my spouse and I can continue to work full time. We're lucky to be able to work from home, and both of our kids are typically developing. Our second grader tolerates remote school okay. He's even getting a whole 2 hours twice a week, weather permitting, so last week he didn't have any, of after school for some socialization. And with all of this said, I'm constantly feeling at the end of my rope, and so does my family. I'd like to make the following points to the committee and everyone else present. 1, we as a community keep pleading for outside the box thinking and for finding ways to get kids into some kind of in-person learning. Instead of creative solutions, we spent most of good weather in August and most of September waiting for school to begin, and are now being told that the new high school, which meets the HVAC requirements, might not work for small kids because of big toilets? Can there be a task force or designated champions for creative solutions, since these don't seem to just organically appear? 2, I would like to ask for the HVAC reports to be released to the public. We should not need to wait till the contractor is chosen for this work and design picked. Those things are independent. Please do not underestimate the ability of your constituents to be able to understand the documents that we were promised months ago. 3, I see people leaving the district. Do we know why? Do we know which demographic is leaving? Which demographic wish they could leave but cannot? Will this impact the school next year? This all are things that keep me up at night. And another point, I don't think it's realistic to plan for schools to stay open 100% of the time once we go back to actual hybrid. The schools or an individual classroom would most likely need to go remote again, either because of community transmission rates going up beyond a certain point, or because someone in the school will become infected, so people in contact with this person will have to quarantine. Why don't we plan for that? We need a robust plan for that. What are we going to do? How this will look like? And one last point is that we keep hearing about differences in different demographics with regard to why not willing to return to in person, but we don't understand the reasons. We don't have this information. I'd like to request that there's be a survey or some way, some research to find out why people are reluctant to return. What can be done about that? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that comment, and you hit 3 minutes right on the spot. I would, before we go to Mayor Curtatone and then we'll go to the superintendent's report, I just want people to know that the superintendent and Ms. Bertholdo will be reporting out on student enrollments during the superintendent's report tonight, so stay tuned for that. Mayor Curtatone, would you like to give an update on where we are on the...
I'm starting to put it back there regardless. You're going to get pissed.
I'm sorry, can you hear me okay, Madam Chairperson? I'm just adjusting.
Absolutely.
So thank you. I am going to ask, I have to have shared screen ability and get how to do it off this system. I got it. Thank you, Catherine. It is easier, yeah. Okay, is that viewable to?
Yes.
If you can, okay, great. Thank you. And for some consistency, we've gone up the same deck, adjusting for any updates as I did 2 weeks ago. So first, thank you. As I promised, in every school committee meeting, and I'll preface first by saying that there are community meetings as promised to be scheduled before the end of October and one in November on school reopening. And please be on the lookout for Resistat meetings regarding COVID response by the city. I want to thank everyone who's tuned in and commented, and just in general to the public for really standing side by side as a community in our response to COVID-19. I understand, completely aware of the impact this has had on all our lives, on our economy, on our children. And yeah, I'm fed up with it too. And I'd be the first to say, you know, I'm done with COVID. But the harsh reality is that COVID is not done with us. We look at the data and what's happening around the country. More than 20 states surging. Massachusetts has entered a resurgence. Even today's confirmation of cases well over 800, another, I believe, 13 deaths. Remember, we've lost 42 people in Somerville alone. And confirmation of cases that you hear reported from the state is a snapshot of what happened 2 to 3 weeks ago. And all our approach has been, as we come out of flatten out the curve at the beginning of the pandemic, is to prepare for a resurgence and to try to get schools reopening. Another important data point is last week alone, approximately 100 students in the Commonwealth, there were confirmed cases and 100 school children in the Commonwealth and another approximate 70 teachers. And we know this because indoor congregate settings, where you have aerosoling of droplets, poses a high risk of transmission. Our job right now is to continue to interrupt the transmission of the virus from person to person. That is our main priority in terms of opening schools. And I'd ask anyone, if you have any questions, please send them my way. Feel free to email me and I'll respond to them. But a rationale on opening up schools and the rationale to take in the approach we have to making our schools safe is just that, to one, interrupt the transmission of the virus from person to person, to make sure that our opening poses the least level of risk for that transmission, so the highest levels of safety that we can achieve, and that's what we're doing, and that's why we're investing in that. And remind everyone that all the data is also showing that it is in familial settings that transmission is occurring at a high rate. So as our kids come in and out of our schools and they go home, we got to interrupt that transmission if we're going to maintain the reopening of our schools in a sustainable way. So let me give you an update where we're at right now on reopening. As I mentioned before, and you've seen the slide deck, we are measuring the external factors in the community and intervening with protocols and mandates and guidelines to hopefully influence human behavior, as has been mentioned. And we all have an individual responsibility to continue to wear a face covering, maintain a safe social distance of 6 feet, to not participate in gatherings in Somerville. Large gatherings means more than 10 people, and any activity that increases the risk of that transmission. We need sort of that selfless abidance to that responsibility to look out for one another in order to have the greatest influence in terms of the external factors. We're going to focus tonight back on a couple of the internal factors as we think about the start of reopening of schools, as I mentioned before. And I'll speak to first building and ventilation. Again, our goal is to achieve a low risk score, not a moderate risk score, the lowest risk score possible, which poses the least amount of risk to transmission. And there are no guarantees, there's always risk. But it's our responsibility, mine, to use to propose how we get that done. So going back from our last update, since then, we have walked and gone through all the buildings and reviewed that scope of work with prospective contractors. And as the plans are finalized for every building, they will be public. Part of that is a give and take between contractors answering questions, and to anticipate the next round of questions, we fully draft out and sort of filter out that scope of work. Developing a sequence and prioritization of every building that we're going to be doing, and it's been grouped into 3 buildings. This does not include the high school, because the high school is, if it finishes as projected and the new time projection should be ready hopefully by December 1. But in the other buildings that need to be adapted in the COVID world, there are 3 groupings here as outlined. Group 1, Genziano, Capuano West. Group 2, East, and the mods in front of the high school to understand that we can utilize that. And Group 3, Healy, Kennedy, Winter Hill. And if you recall from previous meetings and conversation, we said the goal is to roll out beginning December 1 schools that are prepared for opening and to adapt to school programming. However, if anything is ready before that, we're certainly geared up to get ready before that. So we have finalized, we're finalizing and approving that scope of work of contractors, and then giving you a projected date at that finalization. So roughly 4 to 5 days away from now. And then we'll receive bids within the next week and a half, and award them contracts by school. Again, the projected scope of work will be made public, what we're doing for school, and we went over kind of what the goals are to bring it to a lowest rated score in terms of the lowest risk for each school in our initial presentation of PULC, and we'll do it again on the next one. So in group one, we're developing those plans to achieve the ventilation goals that we need to begin opening in December 1, and it talks about the other work that has to be done. And then we're establishing the work plans for groups 2 and 3. And I do want to just stop here for a second and talk about there is now a renewed focus on HVAC systems and air handling in schools and other buildings. And even the CDC, despite the current Trump administration's efforts to hold them back on their bluntness about what should be done, has readily admitted or say renewed its recognition of aerosoling of droplets and the danger it poses in indoor settings with not the proper exchange of fresh air or airflow. The other internal factor we've been working on, that's the update in terms of where we are with the ventilation systems and the buildings. But the other internal factor I'm going to focus on, as I focused on 2 weeks ago, is where we are in developing our testing and contact tracing protocols and putting that to operation. So we've done an evaluation of all the possible vendors in those protocols that would best meet our needs as a school district and community and the mandates to the Board of Health. And we're, again, determining the final logistics and what that testing schedule would be. And that would also be influenced by what schools get open when and by what the student population would be. And this slide also outlines the next steps in terms of we're going to develop the specific testing locations based on that plan. What the schedule would be. Initially, we're looking at a PCR test, which is your typical nasal swab test. And you heard Doug Kress, the Director of Health and Human Services, at the last public meeting talked about they're now utilizing more of the anterior swab. So it's not the brain scraper, which I would gladly welcome, having been tested 3 times. I know that's very uncomfortable, but also other tests hopefully will be approved in the near future. If proven effective, we'll be substituting that, but at least the PCR initially. And again, we are working on school-specific contact tracing on our locally developed plan as well. And that is critical because, as you know, contact tracing gives us information real time and allows us to be reactive and intervene real time to contain any outbreak. So, Madam Chair, that's where we are in terms of the testing, in terms of the updates with the buildings and testing plan for the city. As always, if people have comments, we encourage those comments. We'd love to have your input. We will continue to provide more clarity as plans develop and as they're made finalized. We'll put that out for the public for comment as well also. But I do want to restate and clarify that our ultimate goal here is to interrupt the transmission of virus from person to person. And in the schools, that means our plans pose the least possible risk of that transmission and the highest safety standards. We are not going to deviate from that because the health and well-being of not just the teachers, but the students, the rest of the staff, and the community at large are critical. We need to do our part as a community in the absence of a state plan, which does not exist, a regional plan, or even a plan from the Department of Early and Secondary Education. We've had to do this on our own, and I'm proud to say Summerville will set that standard. Happy to take any questions, Madam Chairperson, and between now and the next meeting, hopefully we'll have that public meeting scheduled.
Thank you for that update, Mayor Curtatone. Some of my colleagues do have questions. Dr. Phillips?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mayor, for that update. I appreciate it. I know everyone's working very hard. I appreciate the incremental progress that's being made. But I'm concerned that we're not going to have buildings ready for our priority 1 and 2 students by December 1st. I'm concerned about this because as a researcher, I've read the research, and there's one study estimating that the average student will lose about 70% of an entire school year if they are unable to return to in-person learning before January. This study estimates that Black and low-income students are expected to lose more than a year's worth of schooling, Latino students nearly a year. Now, these are estimates for the average student. I submit that special education students, English language learners, and early learners will experience even greater learning loss if we can't get them back to in-person school before next year. That's one reason I'm really concerned that the city meet its December 1st deadline to prepare safe spaces for our priority students to learn. Meeting this deadline is also critical because every day that our school buildings are closed is another day that we are putting many of our students at risk. We have young children doing remote learning by themselves or under the care of older siblings because their parents have to work.
We have students learning in unlicensed home daycares or licensed facilities with HVAC systems nearly as old as the Brown. These learning environments aren't in our students' best interest either. I understand HVAC system upgrades take time. I believe the city's long view of this pandemic is a good one, and I want our students and staff to be safe. But I also do not think it's unreasonable to expect the city to be able to open safe learning spaces for our priority 1 and 2 students by December 1st. So my question is to the mayor, through you, Chair. Could the mayor please tell us how confident he is that the city will meet its December 1st deadline for preparing safe learning environments for our priority 1 and 2 students?
So thank you for that. First, let me respond that I agree on, and I'm acutely aware of the impact as students, since I have 2 doing remote learning in the Somerville public schools. I'm also acutely aware of the way how this pandemic has been unforgiving or relentlessly harsh against our most vulnerable populations. And you mentioned Black and Latino students, the Spanish-speaking population, Latino population are 4 times more likely to contract this virus than you or I. And that's why we're going to take the steps that we have and that we've done and that we'll continue to do and make sure those schools are safe. We're not going to rush people back in for any deadline. The deadline, I'm reasonably confident, barring any unforeseen circumstance. And we haven't awarded a contract yet. Right now, what we're hearing is that those dates are doable and the groupings that we've said, and if we can get them done earlier, we will. But let me make something clear for you to the good school committee woman. If we feel we're not going to be safe in any of those buildings, all bets are off. And I'll make this other thing clear to the public. We're now in a red category committee. We will not jeopardize anyone's health or potential risk of life to rush open any opening. I understand we're done with this. I understand, very much aware of the impact it's having on all of us. But there's no trade-off there. So we are reasonably confident based on what we're hearing back. And it's the reason we go on the walkthroughs with all the prospective contractors who may be bidding, so they understand our timelines, our priorities, and we need to know from them if they were realistic. What we're hearing back today is that they are, but it's still going to have to be performance up to the contract. So we will do everything we can once we award a contract to hold that performance fee to the fire, and we'll work closely with the school department in getting the buildings that we mentioned open, not just by December 1, but as early, even earlier if possible.
Thank you.
I haven't. 3 other school committee members have questions for you, Mayor Curtatone. The next step is Dr. Ackman.
Hi. Thanks for taking the time to present. I really appreciate it. I'm curious what we think the order of buildings would be, which buildings will be coming online first. I think that's important for families to know. And then also anticipating, we're going to bring back the highest needs students first, but sort of what are the grade spans as well, if we have some sense of that?
So I can speak to the building asset, and as we report back and work with the school department, we're working closely, but we from the building and physical plant management side, report back to the schools. These are the assets that we can get back, and we understand the school's priority, which echo that of Dr. Phillips, but we lost my train of thought. And then we leave it up, the school will set out the programmatic goals and priorities for that. So grouping, as I mentioned, group 1 first, and we'll get into the finer detail as we award the contracts and give a timeline in terms of how they sequence within that grouping. Are they all going to be December 1, or is anything going to open up a week earlier? Are we going to miss the mark? I mean, these projects also have to be managed, which is why we have PMA on board, which is our owner's project manager on the high school project, and we have familiarity with them to help us work with these particular projects also. So we'll have a better and more specific timeline once we finalize the awarding of the bids in those particular project scopes.
Superintendent Skipper?
Through you, Madam Chair. So Dr. Ackman, in terms of the phasing sequencing, as we laid out, special education and ELL levels 1 to 3 are within our phase 2A and B. And then we start with pre-K, first, second, and we move up through primary into elementary. Additionally, UNIDOS, because they have a pocket of language learners, both of English and of Spanish, they would also be in one of those priority groupings. you know, as we look at the high school and the high school building to see what options are there relative to serving other grade spans as we go above grades 3 and 4. So these are all, as we're get the assets online, this is exactly what we're sort of looking at, is how to place the programs. Special education in particular needs particular types of program settings relative to things like bathrooms, nursing stations, space, counseling, things like that. So, but we will be following the phasing as we laid out as much as we're able to with those assets that come online.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Mr. Green?
First, Madam Chair, I have several questions. So would you like me to ask one at a time, or?
I would, because after you is Ms. Barish, then Ms. Batone, and I will put you back in the queue. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So my first question, so I hear and I appreciate that our goal is to minimize risk wherever possible, but we all acknowledge obviously that eliminating risk is impossible, or rather we could say we're not going to come back to school until there's a vaccine that's been widely distributed. We're not saying that, nor should we. So we're accepting that there will always be some risk. So my question is, in concrete terms, what is the difference between low risk and moderate risk? And what is the cost benefit analysis that makes us confident that low risk is worth more time?
Sorry about that. Through you, Madam Chair. Well, we follow the ASHRAE standards, and you know the consultant we brought on board is very experienced in healthcare facility surroundings. There's advisors here, and we recall we categorized the buildings based on initial assessments in the low, moderate, high risk categories, and determine what it would be to get down to low risk. We cannot get to a zero risk. That'd be impossible. But the low risk between that one score of 1 and 2, as we mentioned, which poses, again, the least amount of risk for transmission. In terms of cost benefit analysis, I think it's this, the way I look at it, we look at it is how much level of infection are we willing to risk, given the fact that if you look at our school and community population and where this virus is hitting hardest, and it's in the zip codes of 02145, Winter Hill, the Mystics, or in Clarendon, or in East Somerville, it's those it's the Black and brown community, the immigrant community, our elderly, and given the fact that we see community spread happening, and based on all reports and studies in familial settings, who brings it back? So it's not a cost of, I know wasn't the point of your question, but I just want to put in the context. When we think of the benefit, it's not the money, it's how much infection are we willing to risk and people becoming ill. And again, we're 42 deaths in Somerville, and we know it's in those settings, in those tight quarters indoors, and now we're heading into the winter months from the fall, that transmission will occur. So our goal was to achieve the lowest risk. We can't go to zero. It would be impossible to achieve. And we feel that is a high rate of confidence. That's what we can achieve. And that's why we made the commitment to go there. I'd submit, I don't have it in front of me, that the cost might be higher, but the timeline isn't that far off from moderate risk. If we're thinking about how quick to get open schools, we're going to spend more money to do it. But we think it's money that's well spent. And I would say the school committee gentleman's question is fair. It's the same question we ask. What are we really achieving between moderate and low? What's it mean? Can we achieve it? And what's the risk to the population? And given that we're about to do this in the middle of a resurgence, achieving the low possible risk has to be a priority.
Mr. Green, did you have a follow-up or to that?
Yeah, I was just, I get that you have it in front of you and it's notes, but if we could see that analysis between moderate and low, that'd be immensely helpful. Thank you. Sure,
thank you. We can do that. We'll build upon the original presentation where we laid it out, but in the context of everything else we're going to lay out to the community, we can absolutely do that.
Thank you. Just to give you a heads up, I have Ms. Barish, then Ms. Patone, then Dr. Phillips again, and then Mr. Green. Ms. Barish, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mayor, for being here with us tonight. I have a couple of questions, both related to the fact that we are in the red right now. First of all, given the very high standards, the ASHRAE standards that you've mentioned, that you have set for reopening, is there any circumstance under which some students will remain in buildings even in a red period? And then also related to that, I think, is given that we're in a red period now, is there any chance, or I mean, I suppose there's some chance, but do you foresee needing to suspend construction and remediation efforts the way construction was shut down last spring? Just thinking about, the timeline and whatnot, now that we're in the red, I'm just wondering if you see that as a potential challenge.
Through you, Madam Chairperson. Thank you, Ms. Barish, for the questions. On the first part, regarding students being remote in the red or not, I use the example of North Andover where they went to red and they determined, and their sourcing of that case count, positive case count, came out of Merrimack College, and that campus was contained there. So I thought they made the right call based on data and all the other circumstances. That their argument was, well, we know where it's sourced. We're in the red, but the cases normally are coming from this campus where they had an outbreak. So the rest of the community, in terms of school attendance, moved forward. So that speaks to an example of how we should approach it. I'm not a fan of this. I've been very critical of this very elementary color-coded map, one data point that the governors point out from each end of the argument. To say that one community is red and we're green, everything's okay, and that community is in a couple miles rebutting us, makes no sense. Similarly, that we should, you take one data point and that we're 8.2 cases per 100,000 the last 14 days in Somerville, that should close everything down. We don't agree with that. As we mentioned, as we gave, I outlined previous presentations we have and in the public setting, and then tonight, some of the other variables and factors we'll be gauging, not just the number of positive cases, but I try to understand, all the other factors that are impacting that and determine what the source of the outbreak is. If it's in schools, particular schools, that obviously is pretty clear what we'd have to do. If it's coming out of, I don't want to say anything particular because then that industry might think I'm going to close them down tomorrow. A particular type of industry that we maybe have to curtail back. That's the whole argument we made about thinking regionally and having the tools to live in this new normal absent a full vaccine. The second part of the question on construction follows along with that. No, we don't foresee a reason to curtail that unless, that setting is the source of any outbreak. But I will tell you, there have been examples even now where we've shut down a particular large scale project because there was high case count attributed to workers in that project, and we determined based on the data that it was workers commuting from other municipalities in the same carpool and in the same automobile. So we had shut it down, went over their safety plan, had them adjust their practices, and they'll remain closed for a little while. But unlike the beginning when we had very few tools at our disposal, we had large scale shutdowns. We don't see that yet, but I do want to say, I do want to qualify that by saying, we're at the beginning of the resurgence, and the positive case count per day is increasing at a high rate. And I don't know what other mandates the state may come down. There might be large scale closures. We do not know. I hope we don't get there. But in general, that's how we would approach it.
Thank you.
Ms. Patone, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Norman. Thank you to the mayor for being here tonight and at every regular school committee meeting. We know your time is precious and it's highly appreciated. And I also want to thank the members of the community that speak up at our school committee meetings. Our city really believes very strongly and demonstrates this in action in transparency. And I feel like our community in general wants to collaborate. They want to be part of the solution. They don't fight their elected officials. They don't want to fight decisions that are being made. but my interpretation is that they're feeling frustrated. They don't really understand why they don't have the information to justify what's going on. So in terms of what the plans are, and I think you've done a good job of kind of giving the general feeling, but of why your standards are where you want your standards to be. But I do think I want to know on the timeline, when can the school committee and community members expect to have access to things like the building assessments, what the building plans are in terms of the scope of the changes to HVAC, and an extension, which I think Mr. Green already spoke to, which is this idea of the data that makes the justification why this more rigid or strict policy or approach. So I'm looking for timing for release of that information to the school committee and the community.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ms. Batone. One, I'd refer you back to the first presentation we made to the public, the original one, which laid out the assessments of the building, some level of assessment as a starting point, because that makes pretty clear how we scored every building in the community against the backdrop, reconciled against the backdrop of achieving a score range between 1 and 2. That's first. Second, as the plans become final, we are certainly going to lay that out for the public for comment, and obviously the school committee, as we're working collaboratively with the school department in terms of the actual detailed work based upon our original assessment and conversations with whoever the final contractor will be, but what has to get done in detail and how the work is going to be approached and going to be managed and how that impacts the timeline, if it anything beyond or even early to December 1st. As I mentioned in the original slides, I think that will happen now between now and the end of the month, talking about a week and a half away. We plan to have a community meeting, and if that date's been finalized, Matt with Superintendent, sometime between now and then. And we will hopefully have that to be able to talk about that public meeting, and hopefully go to the school committee maybe before. As soon as we have that final bid or awarding, we can go over all the detailed plans.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So, Mr. Mayor, I believe that your staff was looking at the last week of October, but
Okay.
they had not yet picked the date.
Which is only sometime between now and the next week and a half, as I mentioned, just under 2 weeks away.
Ms. I acknowledge you have a follow-up question, but I also just wanted to acknowledge that Mike Long, who is the general counsel to the school committee, has joined us. So if any of you are wondering who he is, that's who he is. Ms. Batone, you had a follow-up question?
Yeah, and so maybe I'm not being particularly articulate around the needs of people regarding understanding what the plans are for the buildings. So I understand there's sort of lower risk and higher risk, and but people, I think some people, and maybe it's a level of detail, I don't know, that may or may not be available, want to understand, well, with this building, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And with this other building, we're going to be doing P, D, and Q because of the problems we're having. So I think people, and myself included, are looking for a greater level of detail of the status of the buildings and the plans to improve them.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Batone, I couldn't agree more. We're happy to do that. I'd first point people back to the original presentation where we did the initial assessment as a starting point. Maybe we could put that up on the screen for people to see if you didn't see it. I would still actually, if you did see it, go back on it again, and then you want to make sure we followed that. I would do that. And that assessment may have evolved and adjusted based on conversations they've had with prospective contractors. This is typical when you have a scope of work and people are going to bid it. You want to describe it so we get accurate and timely bids that reflect the needs and objectives of the community in this case. And that will finalize the details, the minute details of the plan, and we'll put that out for people. People will see exactly if we're doing this to the HVAC system or situating this, anything physically in the building, they're going to know everything for, like you said, what are we going to do, A, B, C, D? We're going to do PBQ, all that stuff.
Thank you for that, Ms. Batone. Next up, Dr. Phillips has another question, and so, and I did not, so Ms. Krepchen, I just saw you. So Dr. Phillips, then I'll go to Ms. Krepchen, and then Mr. Green, I know you have another question, and I see you, Laura. Okay, so Dr. Phillips, and then we'll go to Ms. Krepchen because she hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up on comments made by Ms. Patone and Mr. Green and formally request that these slide decks that you are so graciously preparing and presenting to us at your reports get put in our packets on the Thursday before. It's just really, I know everything's getting done warp speed, things are changing all the time, but it's hard to do my job when I don't have the information. And frankly, it's embarrassing to have to acknowledge to my constituents that things like, I didn't learn of the December 1st date until the town hall, just like you. So I'd like to be able to do my job.
So, to you, Madam Chair, I respect that and agree. If we have it, we'll give it to you. They wouldn't have happened last Thursday. I didn't have it last Thursday. Things are, I mean, so as we have it, we'll give it to you. And, you know, we wait. If getting the best and most accurate information means for me waiting till the last minute, given everything else we got to do, we'll do that. So I assure you, nobody else saw my slide deck before you did tonight. And I got final details on everything this afternoon. So, but I agree. I understand the need to get engaged with constituents. I'll do my best to try to get your son as soon as possible, even sooner than we have. No
Thank
problem.
you.
Ms. Krepchen?
Thank you. Through the chair to the mayor, following up on Laura's comments and questions, thinking about transparency and feeling like one of the frustrations of constituents is feeling like they don't know where these decisions are coming from. And so I'm just hoping you could speak a little to the sort of like first decision that these are the measures we're going to go to get the HVAC systems up to. Who was making those decisions? Who was in the room and said, okay, these are where we need to get to?
Well, let me, to you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. The city's been privileged and blessed to have a cohort of experts that engage with us, with the city on a regular basis. Some who've had roles advising the CDC, the WHO, and even the state's COVID team. Now, when we seek to achieve, in this example, the most safe environment for our teachers and staff and educational community and our students, we engage those experts. And then we bring on consultants to work with us to help us understand how we should assess the problem and make recommendations. We have an incident command structure in the city that we launched since the beginning of the pandemic, which I believe sets us apart from most communities, not just around the Commonwealth, but some of the most in the country. It allows us to be as quick as possible and do as much work and be as flexible and much diagnostic work as necessary to make recommendations to me. I'm the mayor, I'm the CEO. So the final request on spending or anything comes back to me, but it's filtered and delegated at first to a litany of highly talented people that work in the city, experts who are part of a cohort of experts that have engaged, that have been advising the community, and in some cases, consultants who I'll make recommendation based on their best expertise, professional expertise and best practices. So that's how it works in this scenario, like many recommendations made to me. We review many of that with the school department. This isn't done in a vacuum. It's a collective effort and it's presented to the public.
Thank you.
But if you're asking me, for me, if I have the choice, which is it, we can go to a low risk standard or a moderate risk. The answer is easy, the lowest risk possible.
I would also like to acknowledge that City Councilors Scott and Valentine have also joined us tonight. And so in terms of questions for the mayor, I have Mr. Green, Ms. Patone, and then Ms. Barish. Mr. Green?
Thank you. I hate to change topics, but I think this is actually somewhat related. December 1st actually isn't that far away. It's 6 weeks away basically. And the decision to spend the money on these buildings will have to be approved by the city council, by my understanding. So what is the timeline for making a proposal to city council, and how is that going to work with getting this work done in 6 weeks?
We can, we can go out to bid. We cannot sign the final contract till money is appropriated. So that is all working in parallel. We'll be going to the city council soon, I assume, the next meeting. I'll check with my team on that once we have refined the numbers and have an understanding of what we're requesting. But in terms of how it works, we can't sign the final contract. We can do the bidding subject to council approval, obviously, and execute a signed contract once the funds have been approved. That won't slow down. In any case, in general, that doesn't slow down any project unless funds don't get approved. We don't see that as an issue here. City council has to have the ability to do its job and analyze and ask probative questions as well.
Can I get back in the queue, Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Green, I would happily put you back in the queue. Next up is Ms. Patone, and then Ms. Barish, and then we will return to Mr. Green. Ms. Patone?
Thank you, Chair Norman. This question actually is for our counsel, Mike Long, but I think it's important that we all hear this together. One thing I'm trying to learn more about is what's the demarcation between the authority of the city and the school committee regarding policy and school district policy, specifically things like mandating vaccines or mandating COVID testing.
Mr. Long, would you like to speak to that?
I will address it, Madam Chair. So the school committee has the authority under provisions in Chapter 76 relative to vaccines, particularly for admission of students. There are religious and medical exemptions for that. But I would say as a general matter, the school committee can insist that students be vaccinated before they enter school. Other questions are more complicated. There is a question in my mind about the scope of the authority of the Board of Health and whether if the Board of Health determined that it was unsafe for anybody to be in the school buildings, they could, or city buildings for that matter, that they could issue some kind of order from the Board of Health relative to occupancy in the buildings. We're getting into the weeds a little bit, but there are a couple of provisions in the general laws that say, in effect, the school committee retains authority over school buildings unless the town or the city council have specifically assumed authority for them. I don't know what the history is on that in Summerville, but it is one of those policy determinations that also has a political dimension, depending on the, again, the reach of either the town or the city by vote. I hope that's responsive to the question. It was kind of a general question.
Yeah, it's something that we may want to follow up a little further, but the bottom line is I want to understand the scope of our responsibility, understand the scope of the responsibility so that we can collaborate together. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Green, I know I have, is your follow-up question to this comment by Ms. Patone? I'm trying to keep the questions grouped.
It is, but I think Ms. Barrett.
Yes. Okay, we'll just go in order and we will just bounce around a little bit. We can handle it. Ms. Barish?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the Mayor, a follow-up to Ms. Krepshin's question about who is helping you to make these decisions and assess the data and whatnot. I know I've heard on several occasions that, as you put it tonight, I think there's a cohort of experts. At the same time, as I think you're well aware, there are a number of people in the community who have a certain level of expertise in these areas, who've come to very different conclusions about when it's safe to return to school buildings and what risk we're putting children at in not returning to school buildings. So I guess I'm just wondering, is there any way you could tell us who some of these experts are? Because it's the feeling I get from a number of constituents is that they wonder, and I frankly wonder who the experts are if we're hearing that there are all these other experts who say something completely different. And I don't know if it's because of the terms by which they're consulting that they haven't been named, or if there's something else that makes you hesitate to name them. And I don't mean to put you on the spot with this. It's just that people keep asking.
You're not putting me on the spot, but I've done this publicly, just so you're aware. Perhaps you didn't have the opportunity to be in that meeting, as people have asked, and just off the top of my head, and we're happy to do that. And I just want to make sure we're not giving the impression I'm sitting behind my desk on my own, just plucking off recommendations to do. You have a staff of people in the city who are all out dedicated and working above and beyond and outside their normal responsibilities since day one to keep this community safe and to work in this context of getting schools open. Let me just be very deliberate about this. And we've engaged experts, whether they be Sam Scarpino, Rochelle Walensky, Paul Bittinger, other major epidemiologists, Alessandro Vestagnani and others, and many, many more, either epidemiologists or infectious disease experts who have been consulted with the city. I'm happy to provide all that. We've done that in the past, as well as the framework of the incident command structure of the city, if you want to digest that. But I can assure you, it's not done in a vacuum. We've been diligent, methodical, deliberate in thinking about how we respond to the pandemic, as well as the opening of schools or any parts of our lives in the economy. And I understand and recognize there are differing opinions, and I respect that. We welcome that input. I believe members of my staff have engaged many of those members of the community that you're referring to. I think we have a difference of opinion, and we can go into conversation other times of why we don't agree with them, and the experts don't in particular. But I don't want to give the impression, as I think this conversation seems to be going, that I don't want to tell the experts because, we're hiding something. It's not the case. We've told you, we've mentioned that. I was asked in previous meetings of outline. We'll do it again and again and again. And we've added some of them, a couple of them, at least one or two of them have been in even some of the public health and public safety meetings with the city council. I'm happy to bring them on here with the schools as well. And I believe Sam Scarpino was at the first public presentation we did. So I just want to make sure I clarify that so there's no confusion. The last thing we want to do is to raise doubt and credibility or how much we're doing our work on making the recommendations. I just want to make that very clear.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Green?
Thank you again. First, as a real quick point of clarification, as a written thinker, it would be immensely helpful to me, Mr. Mayor, if you could give us those lists of experts in a memo at some point, just because hearing names in a meeting does nothing for me. My actual question is a follow-up to Ms. Patone's question, and thank you, Ms. Patone, for asking the first half of my question so I can skip straight to the follow-up, is regarding the vaccine issue, and this is both to the mayor and to our council. How would mandating vaccines for entry into buildings square with our legal and frankly ethical responsibility to provide special education services to all students?
So is that for me or council or both?
I think it's for both.
So I'll just add, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Mr. Green to clarify, we are talking about the flu vaccine for students? Yes. Is that what you, so
well, any vaccine, any testing plan, I'm sorry, actually, yeah, I should have been clearer. The flu vaccine is mandated by the state, but any testing regime and any additional requirements by the city, what's our constitutional leg to stand on, given our obligations to provide equitable services to special education students?
Well, I'm going to answer first, and I'll make it clear. We're in a health crisis now and a health emergency, not just declared by the state, but the city of Somerville. The Board of Health will put forth mandates in terms of how it believes that we need to respond to that crisis. in the context of schools. I mean, I know we're working on a couple of areas and questions since in general, I mean, we know there are certain inoculations and vaccines that are required to enter school. There are some questions because this is, I haven't dealt with a pandemic in my lifetime. I venture that anyone on this call, including you, Mike, are still young enough to not have dealt with one. So there are a couple of our cases of first impression here, but I'll make it clear from the city's perspective where we come about it that, you know, the health crisis really takes precedence here. And there's some other areas that need for a little further analysis, admittedly, because we never dealt with this before. No offense, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for at least giving me credit for not being 120 years old. So, Andre, the question is, it's a good question. And if you were watching the news last week, you probably noticed that a Superior Court judge in Boston refused the Boston Teachers Union request to grant an injunction to prevent the schools from providing in-school services to high needs kids. So in that case, the union was citing metrics and saying we should be remote for everybody. And I'm summarizing a 25-page decision. And a Superior Court judge refused to grant the injunction, which I think is an indication of the importance of providing services to students on IEPs. We all know that DESE has taken that position. I'm not aware of a decision from either a Massachusetts court or elsewhere that has attempted to square the issue of requiring a vaccine and meeting IEP service requirements. In other words, I'm not aware of a decision that says if a special needs student refuses a vaccine, we still must provide services. My sense of it is, to pick up on the mayor's point, we're in a health crisis. The vaccination statute has been challenged and upheld in Massachusetts. We have a couple of cases that actually have gone to the United States Supreme Court, including one from Massachusetts, upholding Board of Health authority in health crises. So while there isn't any decision from a court of record on it, my sense of it is that given the public health crisis, if a student with special needs refused to get a vaccine, we would be in a very defensible position if they chose to litigate the matter. I hope that's.
Thank you. Thank you. That is helpful.
Okay, and with that, are there any more questions for the mayor? Mr. Mayor, I thank you so much for not just the presentation, but
if there's no one else, I do have one more question.
Mr. Green.
Sorry, you know, I have a reputation to uphold at this point. So finally, on the issue of testing, again, December 1st is, for school committee purposes, 2 meetings away. We haven't heard a proposal from the Board of Health. None of us are public health experts yet. If it is our intention, and you know, for me, it very much is, to have students in seats December 1st, we're going to need a testing policy passed by then. When can we expect to hear something from the Board of Health as to what they're proposing?
I spoke to, thank you to you, Madam Chairperson, to Mr. Green. Thank you again for the question. I had conversations in a meeting today with the Director of HHS, Doug Press. The Board of Health will move quickly once we have a finalized plan on testing, as I briefly touched upon in my presentation tonight. That is almost done. I think we'll have a final recommendation made by October 26th, so a week from today. As soon as that's done, before or on that date, we'll be working, sharing that with the school department and the school committee, and presenting all the recommendations for the Board of Health to take action. So we're getting close on that.
Mr. Green, there is no one else in line. Do you have any other questions?
Just to clarify, does that mean that we can expect in our next meeting to have a policy ready for first reading? Since by tradition we try to have 2 meetings to review a policy before we pass it.
It will. That will be my every sincere attempt, but I will also say that we have, if we're talking about October 26th, getting something from the Board of Health. Our next meeting is that following Monday. And because of Thanksgiving, we don't have room to really push those meetings out farther. This is of such significance and to be prepared for December 1st that it is possible that we may have to call a special meeting to consider it. So as everything about this pandemic, these are unusual times that require flexibility and additional meeting when necessary. So stay tuned, and it is a fair question. Mr. McLaughlin, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, 1 second. Thank you. I just wanted to share that in terms of this conversation about appropriation of money, the City Council will be ready to address this. But as the chair just mentioned, we are in a crunch when Thanksgiving and Christmas come around, and we really like to do our due diligence. So I would ask the city to get us this information as soon as possible so we can make a quick and reasonable decision.
Thank you for that. And thank you all for your questions and comments. Thank you, Mayor, Superintendent Skipper, and Mr. Long for responding. Mayor, did you have any final words?
Yeah, I just want to add, because I did leave something out, and I thank the president, and through him to the chair for the response. That he's correct on that, and I do recognize that. So we'll work quickly in that. But I do want to say, just clarifying, I didn't mention in terms of funding, in terms of how it impacts the timing. So if we bond, or we intend to bond, and we haven't decided we're going to do this yet, or use any free cash, we have to request the funding and do it soon, as we have bids in, and so as we get bids in and award the contracts. So as the president mentioned, do it soon, given the holidays or the schedules that come up. If we use CARES funds, there's no council approval needed. The way the CARES fund structured, it could be a combination. Both. That is what we're trying to determine now. But loud and clear what I heard President McLaughlin mention, and we'll work closely with them as the council's been well tuned into this.
Thank you for that additional information, and thank you all for a lively start to our meeting. We are now going to move on to item number 5, the report of the superintendent. Superintendent Skipper. Are you good? Do you need to share your screen? Okay.
So I'm going to actually, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to ask Assistant Superintendent Mazza. He just has a quick update he wants to share on the LMS and how it's working.
Thank you, Superintendent Skipper. Through you, Chair Norman. Just a quick update on where we are with the Summerville Virtual Learning School. That is the LMS that we have 21 students currently enrolled. We have 4 kindergarten students, 8 first grade students, 3 second grade students, 2 third grade students, 1 fourth grade student, 1 fifth grade student, and 2 eighth grade students, for a total of 21. I am doing daily monitoring of student work in progress, also giving families daily support, whether it's technical or just, another type of support that they need. There's weekly grading of some written assignments that I am also looking into and taking part in, so that students are getting true grades for their work. Most of their assessments are auto-graded, but there are writing pieces to those that need to be graded manually. I'm also having bi-weekly communication with families. I think it's very important to talk at least once every other week All the families that are participating in this have my work cell phone, and we communicate through text, probably on a weekly basis as well. This is an easier way to get to me and for me to be able to respond to families. Students are still members of the school communities that they belong to, and they also have access to daily specialists. I just wanted to bring that up again, because I think most, if not all of our students are taking advantage of that. It's nice because it still allows them to be part of the school community, to see their friends participate in specialist activities, which is an important piece for, social emotional learning. And as we stated a few times when we started this process, students who are in the LMS can transition back to the school at the end of each semester. Quite honestly, as I was talking to the superintendent last week, I think part of the reason for the enrollment is due to the rigorous remote learning that we have as a district right now. I think with the scheduling that is happening, with the synchronous teaching that is happening, the synchronous learning, the asynchronous work, I think there's more rigor than, well more rigor than we had in the spring. And I think families that are participating in this are looking for a little bit more flexibility. But I do feel very confident to say that when we do go back to in-person learning, I think a majority of our families in the LMS are going to join us back in our school buildings. So just a brief update. I'll be giving you updates every so often because I want you to be aware of what is happening, how many students we have, and the good things that they are participating in as well.
Assistant Superintendent Mazza, if it would be helpful, given that so many of our students are in transition and things are very fluid, if a quick memo, just summarizing those numbers that you gave with, grade level and how many would be helpful. It doesn't have to be a full report, but just even those numbers would be. Thank you.
Yeah, I can get you that tomorrow. Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Superintendent Skipper, speaking of numbers and enrollments.
All right. So I'm going to ask our enrollment queen, Ms. Bertholdo, to come on. So we wanted to give school committee an update. October 1st is our SIMS report to the state. And this year, more than any other year, much like other districts, there's just a lot of fluctuation in the numbers, both of students leaving and students coming. And I think the students coming is indicative of the mobility around us. In general, we're seeing students leave the state. We're seeing a bunch of our students moving to other nearby cities to be with families. We see some students leaving the country. We have had certainly some students whose parent has shared that they're going to be either homeschooling or going into private school for the year with the intent to return. So it really kind of runs the gamut, but we wanted to give you sort of a glimpse of the numbers and then how that translates to our reporting out to the state on SIMS. I mean, even as we speak, I mean, we prepared this, on Friday. If we were to run the numbers again, it would look different because we've had students enroll since then. Right now, there seems to be a little bit of a run of students coming and enrolling. So just to give you a sense. So the way this is broken down, and happy to share this with school committee out as a document as well. This is broken down by grades. This is all students. So this is inclusive of special education, English language learners. We do break those out further down, which we'll go through. But you'll see under the withdrawals, and these would be students that are leaving who registered with us and then made a decision to leave. We have a certain amount of students that over the summer leave all the time, regardless of pandemic or not. So these would be students that showed an intent to begin school and then didn't begin. In terms of the newly enrolled, very similarly, these would be students that were probably registered someplace else, and they've now come to us and since enrolled in our schools post July 1st. So as you can see, and I'll go through the grades, but As you can imagine, pre-K, kindergarten, which I will get to a little bit further down and explain why we break those out differently. First, second, third, fourth will be the ones that we see, the most volatility on. That is traditionally true as well for us. Generally second grade and third grade often are big jump off spots for us, where kids are getting bigger, families decide they need a different type of living, and they leave. And I think that pattern is certainly enhanced this year because of the pandemic. So in grade 1, we had 38 students leaving and we had 17 students coming. So as you can sort of see, we've put out here in the margin net. So we're about a class or minus 21 down on grade 1. You'll see a very similar pattern in grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and then it sort of levels off a little bit. Grade 5, we've got a difference of 14 students. Grade 6, 15 students. And then we get into sort of the singletons. Grade 7, 4 students. Grade 8, 9 students. Grade 9, 5 students. Grade 9 is always a mobile year. We generally have some students exiting, moving, or going to a different environment, and then we have students doing the same to us. Grade 10, 4 students. Grade 11, 3 student net, and grade 12, 3. So you can really see the pattern. But what we really wanted you to see is sort of, unlike the last several years where these would have been some pluses, with more students staying and less students coming, we would have ended up with more likely here, which was a net total of 151 students lost. We would typically have seen a positive. So, there's definitely, the pandemic has resulted in student mobility outside of our district, as it has in many districts. In terms of kindergarten and pre-K, Ms. Bertholdo and I talked a little bit about how best to do this. So kindergarten is a little different because in kindergarten, we go by a projection. Kindergarten for us isn't just our students coming from pre-K in our own pre-Ks, it's students coming from all over the city or from other kinds of pre-K settings, and then coming into us as kindergartners. So when we project for kindergarten, we typically, this past year, would have projected 454 students, as you'll see right here. Instead, we ended up with 394. So we had a net loss of about 60 students. So this is, and I can tell you from my colleagues in other districts, kindergarten and pre-K are the 2 grades that families will often make a choice right now in the remote setting, or even in the hybrid setting, they may be that they're enrolled in a daycare someplace for childcare, or in the kindergarten, they may stay wherever they were in pre-K. Many of these families have indicated that as soon as we go hybrid and we have an in-person option, they would return to us. So we do not believe that these are permanent deflation of numbers. We believe that this is directly linked to us being remote and not yet back in person. And then similar with pre-K, we typically project to be full, which is at 232. And so the difference of the 186 is 46 students. Okay. So what it means in general is that we typically, we reported at this time last year, October 1st, 4956 for this total student enrollment. That does not include students who are receiving services from us for special education in a walk-in mode. We instead are reporting 4708. And so it is a difference of about 248 students. Again, if we were to run this today, we might see this as 240. But October 1st is the snapshot of when we have to send the enrollment in. Ms. Bertholdo also broke this down, and Mr. Breslin, by ELL, because the question, we wanted to sort of look at is, are we seeing disproportionate English language learners leaving? Are we seeing proportionate special education students? And so, again, breaking down very similar fashion, starting with first grade, You can see the numbers for our English language learner students, -2 in the first, -8 in the second, -9 in the third, -8 in the fourth, -6 in the fifth, -4 at the sixth, -2 at the seventh, -2 at the eighth, -1 at ninth grade, -1 at 10th grade, -3 at 11th grade, and -1. And at the kindergarten, when we analyzed this, we had projected 72 English language learners beginning kindergarten, and we actually are enrolling about 77. So we're actually a little bit slightly above in kindergarten. And then special education, we're slightly below in terms of the enrollment of what we would have projected. So when you sort of look at how many students have left, 74 who are English language learners, that breaks down to about 21.7% of the students that have left the system. And this is slightly, very slightly, like about 1.5 points above what our overall population of ELL is within the district. Again, our ELL numbers are difficult to predict because some years we get a lot of English language learners at the beginning of the year, and some years we don't get our English language learners till January. And so even in a normal year, you would find that there'd be some level of difference between what was projected and the students who actually came. And then for special education, again, this is not out of district students. This is in district. We have, again, broken down by grade levels, and you'll see very similarly, singleton numbers, -2, -6. So I won't go through these. Some grades didn't have any, and some grades had an additional student move in, as you can see. And so when you look at the kindergarten, it's slightly less, just very slightly, as in 1 or 2 students. So very difficult to calculate meaningfully. And 47 special education students who had attrition outside of the system. That breaks down to about 13.8% of our overall population, which is far below our special education population, which runs about 21% in the district. So Chair Norman, I know that both myself and Ms. Bertholdo are happy to answer any questions. We will provide these. We're actually going to put this into a small slideshow for you to be able to give, and we're happy to put it up on our website as well.
Well, welcome, Ms. Bertholdo. It is always good to see your face. We miss seeing it in person. And I know that in a typical year, this is a complicated and work-intensive period, and more so this year than ever. Because even though you can talk about the net gain or loss of students, those are all individuals leaving the district and all the individuals coming in, and they all need to be welcomed in your department and set up. And I see Dr. Ackman has a question, and then so does Mr. Green. I just would ask you, Sims, can you just, is there a quick explanation of what the October 1st reporting date means to the city, the state, and what it could possibly mean to our budget next year?
Sure. So, Sims gets captured multiple times, 4 times throughout the year that we report. But the October 1st is sort of what sets our chapter, our foundation formula. So when you have a decrease, as most districts have this year, we will take a monetary hit that will then hopefully the following year be countered when students come back. And so right now with the 248, I think it's about a little under $1 million, which would be in the actual foundation formula. Now, there has been, on every superintendent call I've been on, there's been questions from all the districts. Is there a way the state can help us, help all districts with this, where there's been just a tremendous amount of mobility, particularly in the cities, hold harmless, or use last year's numbers. So I know there's a lot of things being talked about, but I don't think there's anything concrete yet. But certainly Director Gorski and myself will keep school committee, informed on this as it goes through. I can't tell because I'm sharing my screen, but Is Director Gorski still on the call?
Through the chair, I'm here, Superintendent.
Excellent. Director Gorski, do you remember with the 248 what the actual dollar figure was?
So the per pupil was just under 4,000. So your calculation of just under $1 million is correct.
There we go.
Thank you for that.
We were predicting a loss of about 300 students to the system. That's what we were predicting based on in the beginning back in September what we were seeing. But what we've seen nicely is some students coming back. And what is very hopeful is in talking with parents, there's a lot of students that will return to us. They have a year's plan somewhere. Sometimes it's out of state, out of the city, or, you know, as I said, it may be in a different care setting, but they have the full intent to return. So we are also seeing, as Ms. Bertholdo will, I'm sure, share, an influx of students. And we're not sure yet how outside of Somerville, the eviction pieces that are the lift of the moratorium on the eviction piece, which obviously here in Somerville is not the case, but elsewhere we're now starting to see, even today, an influx of families coming in because of that. So, you know, I think our enrollment will continue to build back during the course of the year, and then obviously in next year. Finally, Chair Norman, I'll turn it over for questions. But I want to give an incredible shout out to Regina and to her staff at the Enrollment Center. You can imagine, you know, this is a busy time normally for our staff, and you can imagine how busy it is when things have to be done remotely. It adds extra layers to each process and each registration. So they've put in countless hours, after hours, weekends to help support the efforts. So I would be remiss if I didn't give them a big shout out, and Regina for her leadership.
Oh, deep, deep, deep gratitude to you and to your entire staff on behalf of the school committee. Pre-COVID, we were talking about being up, 200, 300 students. This has been a fluctuation that started before COVID and has continued on. And before I turn to questions, I would just ask our city councilors who are joining us to consider the labor intensive and the importance of having in the very transient nation of some of our students, whether they're leaving the district or moving around in the district, and then to consider maybe citywide Wi-Fi or some way to keep our students connected more easily instead of having to solve that situation student by student. So there's my little plug. And with that, we will go to Dr. Ackman, then Mr. Green, then Ms. Barish, then Dr. Phillips. Dr. Ackman?
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Bertholdo, for being here. And thank you for your presentation, Superintendent Skipper. I'm wondering, and since you mentioned that you're pulling together a PowerPoint, maybe you can add it there. Can we also get last year's actual numbers as opposed to the projections, and then how off we are from the projections? I think that would help me, give me a frame of reference.
Sure. What we can say is for kindergarten and pre-K, we're generally full. So the numbers you're seeing are, our projections are from the real number from this time last year.
So it's the same as the number from last year?
Correct.
Okay.
So and that's in general with kindergarten, our kindergarten numbers have gone up each year, as have our pre-Ks.
Right.
We actually added a section. So those would be the numbers that we would have achieved last year that we're now working in deficit from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. Mr. Green?
First, real quick, and I hate doing this because I know that Regina is the hardest working woman in Somerville, but as you know, this chart is confusing in the best of times, and I think there are lots of theories and narratives going on what's going on in schools right now, and I'd love to really be able to do a deep dive. So I'm going to ask if perhaps Ms. Bertholdo could come back in 2 weeks once we've had the spreadsheet and be able to play with it to answer more questions.
Sure. I'm sure, I'm sure Regina loves enrollment, so I'm sure she'd be happy.
I just recognize how hard she works. But my question for right now is, given the fact that I think actually the enrollment hit is less than I expected it to be, frankly, how does it compare statewide? What do we know about what's going on in other districts, particularly districts that are remote versus hybrid? I've heard nationally enrollment in public schools is way down, but I don't really have any frame of reference for what we're doing in Summerville may be affecting numbers relative to other communities.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair. So it's a really great question. Other than I can certainly ask my colleagues, but generally SIMS isn't something that they publish until they're using it for funding formula. So I don't think we could point to a document that would say that. But certainly within the urban network, I will find out from my counterparts. I can tell you in conversations, again, on each of the commissioner calls, and then in the urban soup network, this is one of the topics that's talked about regularly, is the loss of students. So just seeing a lot of students leave the country, a lot of students leave the state, and move around into other cities.
Thank you. As you are well aware, I'm not terribly interested in what's going on in places like Lexington. The urban schools are the relevant comparison for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that question. Ms. Barish?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Bertholdo for being with us tonight, and to Ms. Superintendent Skipper for helping us understand all this data. I'm wondering, now that we know who's enrolled, I'm wondering about whether you can tell us anything about who we anticipate to come back in the remote versus hybrid format, and whether you anticipate doing another survey of parents, or if you're doing it in a more case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. Through Madam Chair, and Ms. Bertholdo, feel free to weigh in on this. We will do another survey for sure. What we want to be able to do is have the details relative to the where and the whens, particularly in our phase 2A and B and phase 3, and then really begin with the survey work on that in terms of how many parents intend to have students remain remote versus how many will intend to come back. Again, having talked to other district leaders, it varies widely. In some districts, 50% stay remote. And I suppose that also depends on when the hybrid in-person begins. And in other districts, it's higher where the virus is concentrated. But we will be asking that in the case of special ed, we specifically have to know relative to the groupings and transportation, very similarly with ELL, particularly if we would be offering the program in a building different than what is typically offered. So that will be survey work that will be done beginning last week of October and into the beginning of November. So we'll be able to report that back to school committee. Regina, I don't know if there's, would you like to talk a little bit about any trends that you're seeing in terms of the students that are leaving or the students who are indicating that they will come back?
So yeah, I was gonna mention about the families who are leaving to go to private or other arrangements, that they say they will come back if we go back in person. So that's a high percentage. And families really appreciated that 1 year emergency withdrawal. And quite a few families, I think would be about 60 students, a little bit over, took advantage of that, and they withdrew and they asked to return, but many said, and we have notes, that if we go back in person, they will return when we go back in person. We see the trains nowadays is a revolving door. We have more families going to private or other arrangements. I think now that we are a few weeks into the remote, parents make some other arrangements. But we also see on the immigrant community, and I live in the immigrant communities, that families are doing what it takes to stay in Summerville. I think what's driving Summerville families out of Summerville is the high cost, especially when immigrant families rent rooms. So we see a high mobility between Summerville, Malden, Everett, and Medford. We now got to a point to help families registering in other districts because it makes it easier to have a connection in other registration offices, parent information centers. And with the remote, it's very hard to the immigrant community to access school registration. So we help them out, but we also see families who moved back, who moved out in April, came back over the summer, now they left. You expect them coming back in a couple of months. So the mobility within the immigrant community is very high, but I can tell you they are the prices drive them out of Summerville. It's the high cost of housing. If they could, as some families are doing, all that they can, especially if there are two parents in the family, to rent a place in Summerville and stay. And they feel safer in Summerville as immigrants. They like the support. You will hear from the parent liaisons, the support that they get in schools here in Summerville. But a lot of times they do not have this choice and they need to go to cheaper places. So high mobility at this point where registrations go down, it dips right at this point. We hit more of a stable, we still registering, but we also see, other parents withdrawing as well. So it's a out of ordinary year for sure.
This was also thanks to school committee support, and then obviously the mayor and city council support, our ability to be able to increase our SFLC coordinators, excuse me, in each of the schools to full-time was the absolute right thing. And then we have most recently increased our interpretation and translation services with some additional personnel. Again, all of these are needed to ensure that our families who speak a language other than English have the resources that they need and the information they need to take the right steps.
And I have to say, to express my gratitude to the support of the increase in personnel, bilingual personnel, to support the community, especially during these times that we are living, when we all know the challenges that many families are facing. So the increase of language capacity has made and will make a huge difference. So I'm thankful to all of you for that.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think to the superintendent, maybe to Ms. Bertholdo. First of all, thank you for this presentation. It's eye-opening. I've been thinking for months about kind of a flow of folks out of the district, and it's helpful to remember it's outflow and inflow, and it's just there's a lot of churn going on in the system. So thank you. Two requests for I think you. One, if it's possible to include in the version of the Excel presentation that you share the breakdown of families who've said they're leaving for now but are planning to come back. I think that would be helpful. and also to request that we get, it seems like throughout the year, we're going to have a lot of mobility amongst our students, more than in a typical year. So it would be great if we could get this presentation again, maybe at the next SIMS report date, which I think is I forget when it is.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So we certainly can do that. Generally, Ms. Bertholdo will present at the Finance and Facilities Committee. That's where generally enrollment is presented. And so she will likely be doing so at one of the first budget meetings, and then we can certainly take that information, which would be around the next SIMS collection, to share with the broader school community.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I had another question. Do you want me to get back in the queue, or can I ask it?
Why don't you go for it? Yeah.
Go ahead. I think this is actually through you, Chair, I think this is actually to Mr. Green, but anyone, please jump in and answer. The question is there any legislation before the state at this moment to help hold districts harmless for mobility amongst our students? Do we?
So,
Mr.
through you,
Green.
Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
So there is legislation that's been filed to do a hold harmless. The governor has made it clear he's not interested, in part because he wants to punish urban districts for being remote. But there is legislation, and perhaps people who may have heard otherwise, but I've heard no indication that the legislation is moving. You know, as you should expect, our delegation, both in the House and Senate, are very much in favor of it. I want to say in the Senate, Pat maybe the lead sponsor of it. But yeah, I've heard no indication that that leadership is interested in moving its bill as of yet.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the information, Ms. Krebchin, and then Mr. Green, and then we'll move on to our next item. Ms. Krebchin.
Thank you, and thank you to Ms. Bertholdo for joining us this evening. First, I just wanted to say that I'm excited to hear that the full-time liaisons are super helpful, so that's always good to hear. My question about the enrollment studies, or the enrollment numbers, is how it breaks down among schools. And I don't need exact numbers, but I know there were trends at the very beginning of the year that certain schools were losing a lot more students than others. So I was just curious if those trends were continuing or if it was sort of generally across the board.
So, Regina, you can certainly share, because I think it's also losing and gaining, right? So it's sort of like the net impact. So, Regina?
Yeah, we can. So the schools that I can, I see that they are losing, but also gaining is one is the Argenciano, right? So it was a lot of students who left throughout the summer, but then we have been building enrollment with the new families that came in.
No, not even close. I'm sorry. I wish we were.
In the Brown, there was a lot of families who moved out, but in this middle is a lot of what we call ITRs, the intent to return students. So we have this spreadsheet with all these students. So Brown, I would say the enrollment went down with a lot of ITRs. We've seen some families in the Kennedy, and it started at the West Summerville for a couple of weeks and then it stopped. But also the West Summerville is building their enrollment back. So I would say we did not see, saw a lot of families leaving the Hill and the Winter Hill over the summer. But a lot of the families who moved to town at the end of the summer, our late enrollment, they live more on the 0 to 145 area. And therefore, the enrollment at the Healy, Winter Hill, East Summerville has held very consistent. And the Capuano, they lost a lot of the pre-K. So the enrollment in Capuano, because it's pre-K, K and 1 and 2 are the grades most affected. and they are the ones that we see the gaps on enrollment in some schools.
Makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Green, the final question for our.
In some ways, it's a variation on Ms. Cripson's question. I would love to see the demographics of the new students versus the departing students. I think there's a lot of theories people have right now about what is and is not driving the churn, and I think the demographics will be telling.
I agree. I concur, and that is something actually that Ms. Bertholdo and I talked about earlier today. We just need we needed a little bit more lead time to pull it together. So that's something that we'll work on for sure over the course of the next week to 2 weeks for the next school committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regina, we always appreciate how hard you work. This year is extraordinary, but also on behalf of the school committee, we'd like to extend our condolences to you for the loss of your father. So not only are you working phenomenally hard, it is also a difficult time for you and your family. And we send our love to you and to your daughter and to everyone. So you being here tonight means a lot. And I know I speak for all of my colleagues when we say we are deeply sorry for your loss. And we are always happy to see you, but we appreciate the complexity in both your personal and professional life right now. So thank you for doing all you do.
Thank you.
And someday I'm going to get to hug you again. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you always. And I hope this concludes your work day, but knowing you, it may not. So we will.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks,
Always.
Bye.
Bye. Superintendent, is there more to your report?
Oh, of course there is, Miss Normand. So there's just a few more things. Just, on a very good news piece, the student attendance rates in the remote have been, mid 90s and even higher than that during the remote period. We really, we know how difficult this is, and we appreciate the hard work of parents and staff and our students to keep up with the work and to adapt to the best that they can in this phase so that we can get to the other phase and not have students too far behind. A big shout out, the outdoor enrichment programming has been going really well as well. Additionally, as I reported out the last time, we have about 230 pre-K and K students who are participating in community schools. And that's the midday enrichment program, which is free from 12:30 to 2:30. And then about 327 students in grades 1 to 8 are participating in the free after school enrichment with the rec. And again, can't say enough for both the rec and Director Lathan, as well as community schools and Rosanna and all of her work. Additionally, there's about 383 pre-K to 5 students who are also in the after school component, which is the fee-based side of community schools, and that runs from 2:30 to 4:30. So, as much as possible, we're trying to get the students some social interaction, some outdoors, and the tents have proven to be very helpful. Staff are certainly using them to meet students. We've been able to do testing and other kinds of things, and so we're hoping weather has been has held up for us, and we're hoping that continues until we're back into the buildings. A big shout out also to Lauren and to her team over at the Food and Nutrition Services. I can't say enough how much that team has done since the closing back in March of making sure that our families have what they need. They've been incredibly flexible to the needs of the community. We're offering a daily grab and go breakfast and lunch meals all week long. Each day the meals are available on Monday through Friday in each of our elementary schools. And it's you often see the students coming up just to check in. They're very excited to be able to get their grab and go and then go back to their Zoom class. We made the accommodation to be able to add a pickup window of 7:30 to 9 o'clock at the East, the Healy, and the Winter Hill, and that was based on community feedback so that parents can grab that before going off to work. Right now, we're averaging about 4,000 meals, about 1,800 breakfasts and about 2,200 lunches. And that is definitely increasing each week from
a week or a day. Are those meals, is that the number over a course of a week or a course of a day?
Over the course of a week. Over the course of a week, 4,000. And so that's, you know, that's actually exceeds what we had during the initial closure back in March. I think also, you know, having the rec and the CS programming at 12:30 is also giving students the opportunity to be able to come and get it, and then they can eat in, under the tents and so forth. So just, you know, a big shout out to Director Mancini, to Pauline Uccello, and to the entire Food and Nutrition Services team for just their dedication to make sure that our students and families have what they need. Again, as we talked about, the SFLC, it continues an enormous amount of family support, doing virtual playground that they offer through Facebook Live, and then they're doing a range of parent support groups through Zoom on a variety of themes. You can find all of that information on the website, on our website, for play groups, support groups, etc. Also, a big shout out to the 7 high school students, the seniors at Somerville High School, who earned a recognition for the 2021 National Merit Scholarship Program. Silas Booth is a semifinalist in this, which it's a very prestigious annual scholarship program. He joins about 16,000 semifinalists nationwide who've had the opportunity to advance in the competition. And that's for about $30 million of National Merit Scholarship. 6 other seniors, Henry Ayana, Justin Booth, Braden Goldstein-Gelb, Willow Klein, Justin Millette, Owen Thompson, and Kevin Wen, all earned commended student recognition from the National Merit Scholarship Corporation. And that's, again, you know, a competition that has about 1.5 million students across the nation that compete in it. So it's quite a feat to be commended and to get to the semifinalists. So we're going to wish Silas good luck as he goes on in the competition. And then just finally, I wanted to, 2 things. One is the flu clinics. And, you know, we've had tremendous response. Thank you again to the Somerville Health and Human Services Department for offering those flu clinics and having our students and families benefit from them. Again, we would encourage everyone to get out and get their flu vaccination. You can find that information on the City of Somerville website. And then we also have been sending it out in our information. And then finally, just a big shout out to Dr. Boston Davis, as well as our school-based equity specialists. They've put together, you know, working together, a number of equity PD opportunities for our staff. And these are ones that are being offered that are open to all staff. Examples would be like inclusive anti-bias curriculum. They've got a professional learning community, English language success plan implementation, supporting LGBTQ students during remote learning sessions, inclusive anti-bias curriculum for young children, a transitional roadmap for the transition planning process for our special education students, and an anti-racist action-oriented book study for educators of color. So this is an affinity group. My Grandmother's Hands is the piece that they're reading. So just a lot of great work that's happening with our equity specialists, again, led by Dr. Jessica Boston Davis. So that chair concludes my report.
Dr. Ackman has a question for you. Dr. Ackman?
Yes. Okay, there I am. So the out of school time program, which seems to have been very successful, I just want to ask on behalf of a number of constituents who have asked if, if like, is it possible to expand it? I think I know the answer, but everyone I know is very interested in more of it. So I felt compelled to ask.
Yeah, so I think we want to be as responsive as we can. So I think, as you know, with New England weather, it is a bit unpredictable. The tents are not snowproof. So if we do get early snow, that will be problematic. Fortunately, we've had good weather. I don't know on the recreation side that we can expand it, but we have gone back to community schools to ask if there can be additional openings. And then I know we're also looking at the dates. I know Rec has indicated that some of its programming will be staying on Wednesdays post December 1st, because even in the hybrid, Wednesday is the remote day, the asynchronous work day and synchronous. So we will be looking at Wednesdays to see what other kind of programming we can put in there as well to get the kids out. I mean, as you know, unless it's bitterly cold, we like to get the students out and about. We may have to chunk it to smaller amounts of time, so that it isn't 2 hours, 2.5 hours. But I think the importance of students being able to interact with each other and get that kind of social component and just get out into the fresh air is really a vital one. So we will work on that. So you can let folks know who haven't already reached out that one thing Dr. Curley is actively working on with Rec and with community schools.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Barish also has a question for you. Ms. Barish.
Thank you. So first, I just want to say that I have a kid who is in rec programming on Thursdays and Fridays, and it is the first thing he talks about on Thursday morning when he wakes up, and sometimes the first thing he talks about on Monday morning when he wakes up. He loves it. So thank you to you and everyone on your team and everyone at Rec who has made that happen. It's awesome. I also just wanted to ask, and I'm like, what was I going to ask? At our last meeting, you mentioned that I think your staff was looking at buildings other than school buildings that might be appropriate for in-person learning. And that came up at the Finance and Facilities meeting with Mr. Raish. He said that he didn't have any update on that. And I just wondered if you had any update on that.
So we didn't. I mean, we looked initially. I know Mr. Raish looked, long and hard at the city buildings, and I think has been indicated the city buildings are actually in worse shape than ours to retrofit. So I know that they are looking to see what comes up for inventory, but to the best of my knowledge, nothing has yet. But I will check in with Mr. Raish and report back to you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
And that concludes the superintendent's report. And I'm going to take an item out of order at 9:20. It almost seems silly to say that this is getting to it early, but I would like to take under new business the acceptance of the FY 2021 grants. And it looks like Finance Director Gorski is hanging in there with us. Is he still? Welcome. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Superintendent Skipper. We're asking the school committee to accept 3 grants at tonight's meeting. The first is a state grant, Fund Code 336, supporting students' behavioral and mental health and wellness. The district utilizes this grant to fund support for English learners with trauma, also for therapeutic services and professional development. The 2 federal grants that we're asking you to accept tonight fall under the IDEA umbrella. IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which governs how states and public agencies provide early intervention, special education, and related services. Our 240 grant, the Special Education Entitlement Grant, in the amount of $1,602,269, and is our largest federal grant, funds SPED classroom teachers and support staff, our SPED summer program, professional development for our SPED teachers, and contractual services for vision support and assisted technology. Our 262 grant, the Early Childhood Special Education Grant, in the amount of $60,959, funds coaching related to specialized instruction and support to special education preschool students in inclusive settings. So those are the 3 grants that we're asking you the committee to accept this evening.
Can I get a motion to accept?
Andre Green, so moved.
Emily, seconded.
There's a motion by Mr. Green, seconded by Dr. Ackman. Are there any discussion on the grants? Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Dr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Krepshin?
Yes.
President McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone, Mr. Green,
Yes.
Ms. Barish,
Yes.
Ms. Patone,
Yes.
Dr. Ackman,
Yes.
and Ms. Norman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Finance Director. Have a good night. We will now go. Thank you. Go back to item number 7, unfinished business, Somerville Public School Policy Manual. This is revisiting the gender identity support for staff, which we were working on pre-COVID. We did the first reading then. And since then, Ms. Barish has proposed some relatively slight change to the amendment to the language. Ms. Barish, would you like to speak to that amendment? And for anyone who's interested, it's in the handouts. It is, well, it says there it is, GBBA-E Barish revisions.
Thank you, Chair Norman. I was, of course, my computer, I couldn't get it to open now, and now it's opening like 7 copies of it. So bear with me while I close some windows. Just for a little context, this policy exists, and my colleague, Ms. Patone, proposed an amendment. I think it was, gosh, maybe our last meeting in February. And because of some concerns about the language, I believe you suggested that school committee members come back with any changes. So this language reflects input from Health and Human Services, and I also received some positive feedback from SPS staff members, although they did raise some concerns with implementation, but I think that's the policy comes first. So shall I read it, Chair?
Sure, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So this is file GBBA-R, Gender Identity Support for Staff. The Somerville Public Schools strive to provide a safe, respectful, and supportive environment for all staff members. Somerville Public Schools support and respect staff members' individual differences and privacy needs. For staff who identify as gender nonconforming and/or transgender, the district will support them in the use of their chosen name and gender pronouns in conversation, written communication, and on school-issued identification, and will follow their lead in changing their name and gender pronouns on legal documents. Somerville Public Schools will ensure that staff restrooms without gender designations are available in all Somerville Public Schools buildings. Somerville Public School employees will use the facilities or restrooms that correspond to the gender with which they identify, or may choose to use facilities or restrooms without gender designations. Somerville Public Schools will provide all administrators and staff with professional development related to gender identity support and inclusionary language. Administrators and staff will follow the referenced procedures for supporting their colleagues. Each employee of the Somerville Public Schools is personally responsible for supporting and affirming the gender identity of their colleagues.
Thank you for that. I know it's been some time since we have visited this question, and it's back before us. Ms. Patone, did you want to comment?
I just wanted to thank, through you, Chair Norman, through my colleague, Ms. Barish, to thank her for following up on this and taking it to the next level. I think it's improved. I guess do I need to make a motion to accept her amended version of it, or what's the next? Because the original one was on the table.
You could accept it as a friendly amendment, and then our reading of it, technically this would be the second reading of it. We could vote on it tonight if you were to accept those friendly amendments. They could just be incorporated in.
So that's assuming I actually originally made an motion. I don't even remember what happened back in February. Did we ever make a motion to approve, or?
We made a motion to, yes, we had it was read, there was a motion to approve, and then we were going to come back to it at our next meeting, and then the world fell apart. So
I was the one who made the motion. I accept the friendly amendments.
Hi, this is Catherine. I just want to clarify that if you guys open both documents, the original one from March 9th, the sentence is read. The amendment was just to add that one sentence.
The sentence.
The motion, I'm sorry, the motion was just to add that one sentence, the original motion.
And so I guess, can I accept the friendly amendment to replace that one sentence with her paragraph as well as, or is that too complicated? I'm just trying to figure out how to move this forward.
Mr. Green, could you weigh in on this? I don't see that there would be a problem, but
Unless there's an objection, she can, Ms. Patone can do whatever she wants, as long as no member objects.
thank you so much.
So I make a motion to, or I accept it as it is in the new form provided by Ms. Barish.
Okay, so Ms. Barish?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask through you to Ms. Skipper. I just wanted to know if it's problematic to say that Somerville Public Schools will ensure that staff restrooms without designations are available. Especially right now, it's clear that the city has a lot of control over the Somerville Public Schools buildings. And I just wondered if you see any issue with the implementation of this.
So in general, when we pass a policy, what I would like to see is just some language that says that there's a reasonable time frame to implement, because that then allows us to be able to work with DPW. In most cases, this might be signage or communication to staff, education, all of which will need some planning and take some time. So I think as long as there's there's an understanding that it doesn't immediately go into effect until we have some reasonable time to be able to implement it, I think it's fine.
What do you, and I know it's a complicated time, would you suggest would be a reasonable amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could answer that, but unfortunately, without knowing sort of the layout of when each of the buildings is going to come online, I think it's going to be a little bit unusual. So I'd maybe say during the 2020-2021 year.
Mr. Green, would you like to weigh in here?
Just to remind the committee, because we've dealt with this before, that technically somewhere in section B, our standing policy is that policies only take effect once the superintendent has time to develop an implementation plan for them. And while I generally hate that open-ended nature of that policy, for a position like this, that's probably the right situation. Is that the assumption is that the superintendent has an open-ended window to figure out how to implement the policy.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a smoke alarm beep saying that we need to change battery. Getting a little jumpy. Okay, so we have the amendment. Ms. Batone moved it forward. She's accepted all of the Ms. Barish's friendly amendments. We have an understanding from, I forget the letters, but from another policy that the superintendent has the ability that it doesn't go into effect until a reasonable amount of time for the superintendent to enact it. Are there any other questions or concerns, comments on this? Because if not, I would like to bring it to a vote.
Sarah, I move we pass the policy.
Okay. Let's just do that again because I have no idea who in March did. So that would be helpful just to cover all of our bases. Dr. Phillips moves it. Is there a second?
Second.
There is a motion by Dr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Green, to pass the policy as amended tonight. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Dr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Krepshin?
Yes.
President McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone? Mr. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Barish?
Yes.
Ms. Patone?
Yes.
Dr. Ackman?
Yes.
And Ms. Norman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Fantastic. So that now brings us on to new business. Item number A is the MASC resolutions. At our last meeting, Mr. Green volunteered to be our delegate and Ms. Crutchin volunteered to be our alternative delegate. Stays getting long. So what we have done in the past, and I'm happy to entertain other ideas if anyone has them, but what we have done in the past is to instruct our delegate to use his or her own good judgment, especially as these resolutions might get amended from the floor during the conference. So I'm hoping if anyone has any questions or concerns or strong feelings about how they would like our delegate to vote, now would be a good time to speak up. And hearing Ms. Patone.
Yeah, and I don't, I apologize. Through you, Chair, to the Superintendent, was there anything in the resolutions that you were particularly concerned about that would impact our district in a negative way?
No. I mean, generally we try to kind of discuss them, ahead of time to just sort of summarize them. But no, I mean, I think, no.
All right, that's all. Thank you.
Mr. Green, would you like to weigh in at this moment?
Thank you. Having reviewed the resolutions, obviously, I actually believe for the first time, certainly on my time on school committee, every resolution before the body is one that the school committee has already taken a position on. So I feel like I have pretty strong guidance on this one.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. There is nothing in there that we haven't already had some discussion on. And so unless anyone else would like to speak up now, I would like to thank Mr. Green and Ms. Crutchin for volunteering to represent us and have full confidence in your ability to make decisions on our behalf at this. So it will not be in person. Is it this Saturday, November, whatever the first Saturday is, will be the session, and we look forward to hearing your report out afterwards. The next item of business is the legal counsel search. Ms. Crutchin has taken the lead on that. It was sent out. She's contacted MASC, who has sent us a PowerPoint with a lot of good information. It has been sent. It's in the packet, but it's also for anyone in the handouts here tonight. Ms. Crutchin, would you like to speak? She's also spoken to a number of law firms about what you've learned so far, and if you can, you think how we might want to proceed on this search.
Happy to. So I know we are still undecided about whether we're going to hire an in-house counsel or a firm, although based on our earlier conversation, it sounded like we were maybe leaning more towards a firm, but again, we haven't made any decisions about that yet. So what I've done is just research about firms. I am assuming if we decided to hire in-house, it is much like any employee search that we would post a listing and then interview candidates, but I'm not sure about that. So what I did was speak to 4 of some law firms that Glenn Kuchar at the MASC recommended. All of them were definitely interested in us as a client should we decide to go that route. And speaking to all 4 of them, I thought they all had something to offer. I won't go into details because I don't know that this is the time or place for that. But anyway, in my just initial conversations, they all seemed potentially interesting. I spoke with Glenn at the MASC about what our process should be, and he said that if we want to interview firms, we should either do it as a subcommittee or as a full committee and part of our full school committee meeting. That is entirely up to us how we want to do that. But if we decide to do that, then that would be our next step for that. One of the law firms did send me an official proposal. I'm sure that the other 3 would be happy to do it if I request it. So we could share those amongst the full committee or discuss those as a subcommittee, depending on what we want to do. And that is what I have learned so far.
And thank you for doing all of that research, both in terms of talking with law firms, but also how to go about making this decision. I'm going to create a personnel subcommittee because I think there is so much going on on our plate. I would love it if we could get two or three members to be on that subcommittee. I would ask Ms. Krupchen to certainly be on it, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but would also love it if you would be willing to chair that committee because you've done so much work. So in the next, over the next couple of days, if you are a school committee member interested in being on a subcommittee, a personnel subcommittee, we form these committees at different times when we need to do searches. Please let me know, and we will sort out the question about firms or in person. I think that is a great place to hash out some of those decisions and bring it back. It's a really tight time frame. Ideally, some sort of report for the next school committee meeting, and if not, we know that we have Mike Long at least through November and December, so we can expedite this process. Okay, Mr. Green has withdrawn his question. Thank you for that. Thank you so much, Ms. Krupchen. And sure. I would encourage all of my colleagues to read through those PowerPoints. There's a lot of very good information, and I think it would, we don't need to reinvent the wheel when there is already some good precedent. And then, but of course, we will need to tweak it in ways that make sense for our local community.
And I'm happy to chair it, the subcommittee, that's fine.
Thank you, and thank you for, I know I just put you on the spot, but you have really taken the leadership on this, and it's deeply appreciated. So no problem. Thank you. If you are interested in joining that subcommittee, please contact me and Alana. Thank you so much. That covers, we are, as I say, new business is done, but it is not. We are now moving on to donations. Item number D, if I could get a motion, that would be fantastic. Can I get a motion to accept the donations?
I move to recommend with gratitude the following donations. A monetary donation from MASS and KISS 108 of $7,298 to the Somerville Public Schools for purchasing student technology. Also a monetary donation from Kevin Grenan of $1,463.67 to support the purchase of music education books for the students of Philip Grenan, music teacher at SHS.
Is there a second?
Under Green seconds.
Second.
Thank you so much. There's a motion by Ms. Batone, seconded by Mr. Green. Is there any discussion? Can we get a roll call vote on the acceptance of donations, please?
Dr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Krupchen?
Yes.
President McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Barish?
Yes.
Stone? Ms. Patone?
Yes, sorry.
Dr. Ackman?
Yes.
And Ms. Norman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much. Are there any items from board members?
Yeah. Through you, Chair Norman. To you. I'd like to make a motion of a request for information for the mayor's office of a list of the proposed upgrades to school buildings by building to make improvements to HVAC and humidification to reduce the risk associated with COVID. This could be in the form of the current request for proposal or request for quote, or a list based on the building assessment.
Okay. So there's a request for that information from Ms. Patone to the mayor's office. Thank you for that. I also, okay. I'm not sure if the mayor is still on the call, but we will also.
Yeah. And I, go ahead, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the color on my camera. That's why I'm off. It's freaking out.
So Ms. had made a request. I'm sure you heard it, to get more information specifically about what needs to be from the buildings.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll restate it again, as soon as we have that information, we're going to provide it. So I think I stated that more than once, and I'm happy to provide that. We'll give all the details as we finalize them. Thank you. Sorry for the camera.
Are there, Ms. Patone, would you have a follow-up?
Clarify, I guess what I'm challenged with or trying to understand better is that I've already made a request for proposal or a request for bid from contractors. And I looked on the city's website and I couldn't find an example of it. And I understand maybe it's being handled differently because it's an emergency situation. But even if we just get a copy of what information is being requested from the contractors, that would make me more comfortable or better understanding of what's going on. So again, in the interest of transparency, and I made it as a motion because I wanted to bring it to the school committee, and if other members want to second it and vote on it, if they don't want to second it, it's totally understand that, but that's why I put it in the format of a motion. Thank you.
Okay, so there is a motion on the floor for a request for more information. The mayor has said when it's available. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second the motion. I'll second the motion.
So there's a motion by Ms. Patone, seconded by the mayor. Is there any further discussion on that motion? I'll vote.
Dr. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Cruption,
Yes.
President McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mayor Curtatone,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Ms. Barish,
Yes.
Ms. Patone,
Yes.
Ms. Hackman,
Abstain.
Ms. Norman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Are there any other items from board members? Mayor, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. Just in general, and I just want to make a statement. I understand there's a lot of questions, rightfully so, especially on a whole host of issues related to COVID in this context in schools. And not everybody's going to be happy with their decision and approach, and members want to be responsive. Feel free to call me. I know there's a letter going on. I wasn't made privy to the letter till late in the day today. I thank for the member who sent it to me. A lot of these questions have been asked and answered, and I would submit in my reaction really is any insinuation that we haven't been transparent, which is, I think you just have to look at the meetings and what we put out publicly. And also, I don't want to belabor the point, but as this, we're a phone call away, and we're working closely with the chair and the superintendent and the community. So if you have any questions you're really stumped on, or if you feel we're not giving you information, we'll give what we have. We'll get what we have. I just want to make that comment because I get the sense that, well, anyway, I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for that. Are there any other items from board members? Okay, we have one condolence on behalf of the Summerville School Committee. We send our deep condolences to the family of Nasos Sentimentos, Father Regina Bertholdo, SFLC Enrollment Center Director, dear friend of the school committee. We are adjourned.